special orders is General Orders Number 6, House File 600. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President and members. House File 600 keeps labor standards related to wages, benefits, and scheduling fair and consistent throughout the state of Minnesota by prohibiting local municipalities from passing a local ordinance or resolution regarding wages, benefits, and salaries. And scheduling, members, the language in the bill is very narrow and very focused on wages, benefits, and scheduling. Now, I understand that this might be somewhat controversial, but again, the language in the bill is very narrowly focused. And with that, Madam President, I do have an amendment that I would like to offer. It's the A4 amendment.
Senator Miller offers the A4 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Miller moves to amend House File 600 as follows. Pursuant to Rule 45 adopted by the Senate March 7th, page 2, line 6. This is the A4 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President and members. It's been brought to my attention that the term working conditions is perhaps too broad and not defined in state statute. Therefore, we are removing the words working conditions in 2 sections of this bill, and that's the A4 amendment.
Further discussion on the A4? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Further discussion on House File 600. Senator Champion.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to speak against this proposed file here. Madam President, I know that Senator Little has done, Senator Jeremy Miller has done a lot of work on this bill. But the bottom line, Madam President, is what he alluded to but didn't want to expand more on. This is very controversial. It's not sort of controversial. It is controversial. It goes to the heart of who we are. And let me tell you why. First of all, the bill before the body, Madam President, is filled with and is entitled a Uniform State Labor Standard Act, which is an approach to dealing with labor standards. This couldn't be farther from the truth. This proposal is intended and designed to strip local governments of their authority to improve state or federal workplace standards. Why? Most people will ask that question because whenever you bring proposed policy, you're trying to address an issue. Why? You'll hear from Senator Disick and Senator Pappas about what thoughtful actions were taken in Minneapolis and St. Paul around earned sick and safe time, which is a paid benefit that allows workers to take time off when sick. This proposal that is before the body, Madam President, seeks to undermine the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But quite frankly, let's be very clear, it is not just about Minneapolis and St. Paul. It quite frankly seeks to retroactively affect local policies by stating ordinances dated on or before January 1st, 2016 are also affected. I placed on your desk, and I hope that you've had an opportunity to see, is something from the League of Minnesota Cities where there's resolutions of support for local decision-making. That's important because you have over 30, if not more, cities who put forth resolutions saying, hey, we like local decision-making. And if you look on that list, and it's not an exhaustive list because there's some others who are also should be joined on that list, it's very clear that local decision-making is an important notion. So to stop local municipalities, the chamber and other powerful industry lobbyists lined up to restrict local control. Minnesota cities are permitted to act to promote the general welfare or protect the health of people in their city limits. And various cities, as I talked about before, heard from, worked with, Madam President, their residents and workers to enact policies that benefit them. And now in the name of a disguise called uniformity, the state wants to ambush this effort. We should and must reject the proposed assault upon diverse communities in Minnesota. The wonderful thing about Minnesota is no matter where you go, we have such a rich diversity of people. Different industries, different things that they love to do in their communities. And guess what? Those people that they elect to their city councils, to their mayors, are in the best position to decide what's best for their community. And when we see a bill that seeks to unify or say, put forth some uniform standards, that's denying the diversity and not recognizing the diversity of our wonderful state. This bill, as labeled by a journalist, I read this earlier today, says this is a new bill with an old strategy. This is not new. This is something that we've seen over and over again, and it was a problem then, and it's still a problem now. Associations, like I mentioned earlier, the League of Minnesota Cities and others representing local units of government are also leery of interest groups coming to the legislature when they feel their issues are not addressed on the local level. When we do this, clearly we create a problem because local officials are closer to the citizens in their cities, in the cities that they represent, in comparison to the legislature. And as a result, think about this. Local officials are in the best position to make these important decisions. For the legislature to act as a circuit breaker every time a powerful interest group disagrees with the local government, this would set a very dangerous precedent by taking away choice and flexibility for local governments to respond to unique circumstances. So as a state, I would hope that Madam President, that the folks in this room will reject this proposal. Because as a state, we should celebrate diversity, respect the roles of cities, appreciate their proximity to the residents they serve, and allow residents access to local government to drive policy. And should city councils or mayors fail to respond or act appropriately, then the citizens close to them can hold them accountable through local elections. That cannot happen here. It is a problem. And with that, Madam President, I ask the body to vote against this Senate file.
Senator Little.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Champion mistook Senator Miller for myself, and that's an easy mistake because Senator Miller and I have a lot in common. First of all, we both have dark hair. We're both relatively young senators. He chairs a committee. I'd like to chair a committee. We have a great deal in common. But with all that in common and us being pretty much the same person, we disagree on how state government should function. What's the proper role of state government? In my opinion, Minnesota state government has always set minimum standards of protection and benefits for people. It's never said you can't achieve more or you can't get more. It's always set a minimum, the floor. And this bill sets a ceiling, and I don't think that is the proper role of state government. And there's a few reasons why. First, as a former mayor, we hate being told what to do. Not once in my 4 years as mayor did I call St. Paul and said, hey, what's the best thing for Lakeville to do? Not once did I do that. And there's a reason for it, because there's a lot of folks here that never visited my city, don't know the circumstances or issues that we deal with. And so we're closer to the people in that respect. And then more literally, we are closer to the people. When I go to Cub Foods or Hy-Vee, I talk to people in the grocery aisle, right? Whether I want to or not, you get to talk to people in the grocery aisle, and they ask you about everything. I don't care if Sally's dog is barking too much or if it's the problems we're dealing with in Syria. People talk to their mayors about the problems they are dealing with. And so making sure that our government is able to be responsive to the people, it means that we have to allow cities and towns and townships to have the power, to have the local control, to do as they see fit. So I would also urge members to vote no on this bill.
Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Madam President. There's been a lot of discussion about that this interferes with local control. And I think what we have to do is focus on the actual ordinances that we have seen coming forward and how they far exceed the concept of local control. In fact, what these ordinances do is create local control over the rest of the state. What do I mean? If you have a business that has multiple locations or works in multiple areas of the state, even say in Anoka versus Minneapolis, you have a business that has locations there. What these local ordinances do is force that business to adopt the standard of a city that they don't necessarily do their business in, or they do very little of it. How is that so? If I set a certain wage limit on someone in Minneapolis, and I have a worker in Anoka doing the exact same job, it puts that business in a position of conflict of having to decide, do I raise the other one's wage? Do I leave the city that's imposing this on me? So we have to keep in mind that this is not a local issue. It addresses businesses throughout the state. Additionally, some of the actual ordinance provisions need to be looked at. The St. Paul ordinance says that if you have a physical location within the city and you have an employee that works at that location 80 hours or more in a year, that employee is covered by their ordinance. I will give you an example of how absurd this could be. St. Paul hosts trade shows. Vendors come to these trade shows and establish a physical location. They have a booth. They sell products. That is their only contact with the city. It is not beyond imagination. In fact, I, as a person in business, spent more than 80 hours in the city of St. Paul in a trade show booth for my business. To subject me, whose business was in Little Falls, to the ordinance that was in Minneapolis goes far beyond local control. So we have to understand what we're talking about here. This is not about streets, roads, parks, fire departments, zoning, things that are local. And I respect that, having been involved with a city, small city, and the necessity for them to be able to respond to their people is important. This bill does not prevent that. This bill does not impose minimum standards, as was referred to earlier. This bill simply says you can't do certain things. There's a distinct difference. We're not telling the cities they have to say that the employers must pay less than the minimum wage. We're just simply telling them that that is in the province of the state. And that is where it should be, because this body, deliberative, careful, thoughtful, will look at all areas of the state of Minnesota, what's good for the people of Minnesota, all the people of Minnesota. And I submit that it is beyond local control to think that a local governmental body should be able to have influence statewide over something that is not specifically in their province. So I think Senator Miller has done an excellent job in trying to craft this in as minimalist of an intrusion as it could possibly be. And in fact, it's not really an intrusion. It simply says that there are certain things that are better left to the state, and this is one of them. So I would strongly urge that you consider the fact that the impact of these ordinances goes far beyond the local jurisdiction. And in fact, it is such a complicated issue that even the city of Minneapolis admits it does not know how it's going to enforce its ordinance. They have stated this publicly. So if they don't know how they're going to endorse or enforce the ordinance, how do we as people in the rest of Minnesota know how it's going to impact us? So I would vote in favor of Senator Miller's bill, and thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to share with the members the St. Paul story. So my constituents without earned sick pay, moms and dads, like a lot of us, dread the call from the daycare center, come pick up your sick kid. Or from grandma, I need a ride immediately to the doctor. Or if they sadly have to go to court to file a restraining order, they dread having to go to their boss to ask for the time off. Bills have been introduced in the Minnesota legislature since 2008 to require earned sick and safe time. I was the author of one of those bills, and I couldn't get it passed due to opposition from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. So on a local level, workers in St. Paul went to our city for some help. St. Paul and its Human Rights Commission rose to the task. First, they started a conversation as they searched for an answer that ensures a fair and equitable policy for people who work hard every day to contribute to making St. Paul great, employees and employers alike. They established a task force with members comprised of community members, advocates, and business owners. It was chaired by Rose Roach from the Minnesota Nurses, with Matt Kramer from the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, and J. Paul Harris from the Human Rights Commission. They came together every week for 3 months to wade into this discussion with the goal of finding common ground. They had extensive community input, including 3 public meetings and an online public survey. After they completed their work, they sent their final recommendations to the Human Rights Commission. This is their recommendation report, a very, very thorough process, something that we in the legislature don't have time to do. Then they had a public hearing, then it went to the city council that had a full public process, also had a public hearing before they finally adopted an ordinance last January. I coincidentally was in city council the day they voted on that ordinance. It goes into effect in July unless this bill becomes law. This is what the local community wanted, what the local city council voted on after, as I said, 3 months of deliberation. They have extensive support across the city. Small business owners have voiced support for a sick time ordinance in St. Paul. Here's a quote: "Paid sick time is an easy way to make sure you're retaining people. This business owner sees the value of having that as a benefit for their workers." And finally, sometimes a business owner was quoted as saying, "Sometimes some groups have a tendency to say the sky is going to fall if we do this, and it never does." Raising minimum standards when it comes to workers' health and safety would end the race to the bottom among employers competing to cut costs. I urge opposition to this bill.
Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam President. And nothing stops a single business in the state of Minnesota from offering $15 an hour or offering that benefit, Senator Pappas. To my knowledge, and I would be happy to be stood corrected, there's not one rule in our state statutes, not one law on the books that prevents any business from offering those benefits on their own. And many do. I don't work for $15 an hour. I don't work without benefit packages. My employer chooses to have that as a benefit for their employees. Once again, Senator Libble, I appreciate your comments, but the most local control is what a business decides to do. What you and others are advocating is to override the local control of the individual and the business. You are stripping them of the most local control. What you are also saying is that and to paraphrase George Orwell, all cities are equal, but some cities are a little bit more equal than others. Because what you are doing here is you are allowing the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul to override businesses that do not exist in their city. Example, in my city, in the city of Mound, we have landscapers, and they have businesses where they go out and mow lawn or do landscaping work in places like the Lake of the Isles. So according to my read of what these two cities are doing, if that landscaper, who has a few people that work for him, and a couple of people maybe work in the office, maybe he's got 10 people, and he's got a few seasonal people that work for him. So if he goes into Minneapolis and he mows lawn once a week, sends 2 people in once a week, granted, we only have about 30 weeks of growing time. We have a wonderful thing called winter around here. But if he goes and does this with enough people for enough hours, he will trigger the requirement. So suddenly, the equality of the cities is imbalanced and provided to Minneapolis, because Minneapolis gets to, by their ordinances, impose their ordinances across onto the city of Mountain, where that business exists. Or the fact that the business only has 99% of its business outside of Minneapolis and only a few percentage points inside of Minneapolis suddenly are going to be triggered. They're going to be part of this. City of Mountain didn't choose to do that. Their local control is stripped away from them. You're imposing the local control of Minneapolis upon every other city in the state of Minnesota. That's what we're talking about here today, Madam President. We're talking about making some cities more equal than others. Thank you.
To those remarks, Senator Little.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe Senator Osmick is mistaken about what is the fundamental building block of local control. And that fundamental building block is citizens being able to advocate their elected officials in government for what affects them in their daily lives. And every time and every step we take away something from local governments, you are decreasing the influence and power that citizens have to make positive change in their daily lives.
Further discussion, Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Madam President. So Senator Pappas gave you the St. Paul story, and so now I'll talk a little bit about Minneapolis. So Minneapolis enacted its ordinance, a safe and sick time ordinance, in 2016. So this started as a discussion in 2015 with the City Council. The City Council and the mayor formed a working families agenda, and in the late fall of 2015, they put a partnership together that looked at a whole bunch of initiatives, including safe and sick time and a bunch of other stuff that didn't move forward. They formed a task force, and this task force met a dozen times over 4 months, and they hosted 14 public listening sessions throughout the city to discuss these, what they're looking at doing. This group did their finding and recommendations, and they presented them to the council, and again, a public meeting on March 16, 2016. The ordinance was adopted in May 2016, and it was to go in effect in July 2017. The ordinance literally requires that employees accrue sick and safe time at 1 hour per 30 hours worked to be compensated while using safe and sick time at normal rates of pay. So this affects employers with 6 or more employees. So Minneapolis and St. Paul actually had discussions on these bills and came up with different ordinances. So this isn't a boilerplate. They decided what to do based on what their local citizens told them that they wanted, and what businesses were part of this discussion, and so they had some input into this. And so they had discussions and decided both cities went a different route, but they decided what was best locally for them. So then there was a lawsuit filed in October 2016. The judge ruled in January that parts of the ordinance could continue and that parts should still be discussed in court. And so he issued a temporary injunction to block, the judge issued a temporary injunction to block Minneapolis from forcing companies based outside the city to comply with some of these rules. And those briefs are due next month. Senator Ralph mentioned that this could, some businesses in his community could be impacted. Well, if you have a business in St. Cloud or you have a business in Coon Rapids and you're going to do tree removal or tree trimming in the city of Minneapolis, there are certain businesses that the city requires to be regulated now. So you have to come and get a license. And so, you know, cities across the state already do some of this, where they do require certain conditions if you are going to be operating in their city. So that's kind of where we are today. He mentioned enforcement, and so the city of Minneapolis will implement the enforcement in phases. The Civil Rights Department will investigate complaints. So they are working on this process. That is true. They have said that they are working on it, but again, they are listening to what the local businesses and local people are telling them what they need to make this work in their community. Senator Miller, I appreciate that you removed the phrase working condition in the bill because I think that raised a lot of questions. But I also am concerned that term of employment is not defined here. So Minneapolis has an ordinance requiring that on-sale licenses who hire off-duty Minneapolis police officers sign an agreement in consideration of granting that license, indemnifying the city, and an insurance policy with workers' compensation coverage is offered to the off-duty officer while they are working at that on-sale, basically liquor store or entertainment venue. So one of the questions we have, is that a term of employment? Because the ordinance places a condition on the public or on the private industry saying if you are going to hire this off-duty officer, you need to offer these conditions, or it's a condition you have to offer these benefits. We have a Super Bowl coming here to Minneapolis in 2018. So based on this ordinance, can Minneapolis enter an agreement with the NFL, the Super Bowl committee, or any other entity to provide off-duty police officer support? If they were to do the ordinance they currently have, they would want some conditions put around that to indemnify the city and to provide, again, probably workers' comp for that police officer. So could they do an ordinance or enter into an agreement to do this? The current ordinance they have on the, for the police officer off-duty work has been amended. It was most recently amended in 2013, but is amended several times throughout the years. Sometimes that takes place when there is a new contract with the police union and the police officers, so then they go and update it. So when they update this, because the current ordinance requiring the workers' comp coverage is in place right now, and it was enacted in 2013, so it shouldn't be impacted by this new law. But if the city were to go and amend this, because they have several times, then is it null and void? Or can they amend it? So then what happens? What does a city do? Because terms of employment are not defined. So I did look that up. I did a search, and term of employment is found 4 times in Minnesota statutes, but it is not defined. So, what do we tell our local communities on what that means? So Alexandria, the city of Alexandria, in 2016, so under this, it could be impacted by this law here, did a rental ordinance. And it states that each rental unit must have a local property manager designated by the owner who resides within 50 miles of the city of Alexandria. So is that a condition of employment? You cannot be the property manager for a rental property in the city of Alexandria if you don't reside within 50 miles of the city of Alexandria. So is that a condition of employment, a term of employment, that it is in the Alexandria city ordinance? So, what are they supposed to do? Now, this ordinance has a severability clause, and so it doesn't, potentially the entire ordinance is not null and void, but, can they make this requirement? This is probably for safety, and so if something happens to that apartment complex or rental property, they want somebody that's nearby that can address it. They don't want to deal with somebody down in Florida. So, what does the city of Alexandria do? The Minneapolis enacted a TNC, a Transportation Network Company ordinance in 2015. So this is again where the local communities in Minneapolis, we saw a need of where people were wanting to use Uber and Lyft, and so the city decided, all right, we need to kind of look at what they're doing. It's a public safety issue. We need to know who is coming into our city and driving people around. They have a taxi cab ordinance that required background checks and other things before you could become a taxi driver or a taxi company. So Minneapolis enacted this ordinance in 2014. The state enacted some guidelines around insurance in 2015, but we didn't discuss or require background checks. In the Minneapolis ordinance, it says that you can't be a TNC driver unless you pass a background check and the vehicle passes inspection. So is that a term of employment? Because you can't be a driver unless you can pass both of those issues or pass both of those items. And so is that a term of employment? The Minneapolis Airport Commission and Rochester enacted TNC ordinances in 2016 that also state that drivers must pass background checks and vehicle inspections. The MAC is covered under this bill because, let me get my paper here, it is defined in section 473-121 subdivision 5A, so the Minneapolis or Metropolitan Airports Commission is covered. And then the city of Rochester, as part of their local ordinance, just decided. There was a lot of discussion about this in the past year. Newspaper stories mentioned it. There's a lot of discussion. They heard a lot of petitions. They got a lot of petitions supporting allowing TNCs. Uber responded, and so they came in. So late in 2016, both of those set up ordinances, and both of those have those conditions, and they are conditions of employment in an ordinance. And so what happens to those? This is a public safety issue. The reason that there are background checks required, and it literally says you can't have a felony in X number of years, you can't be a registered sex offender, you can't have so many DWIs, you can't have controlled substances or be on controlled substances. So this is a public safety issue. So what do we tell these communities when they are trying to regulate public safety and improve public safety in their communities? What do we tell them? The MAC also updated their taxi ordinance in 2017, and Rochester did the same, and those also have conditions that to be a taxi driver, you have to pass a background check and have your vehicle inspected and have the vehicle inspection. And so, again, does that taxi license, which is those conditions are put on there for public safety, is that an employment condition? And is that a term of employment in paragraph D? Because they need to know. We need to provide them some guidance of what this means so that they can address these situations. Because does this, if these are terms of employment and they can't regulate public safety and say who can be driving people around, then does this leave the MAC and Rochester without TNCs or taxi drivers? And so I think that I appreciate that you removed the working conditions, because I do think that helps give them some guidance and it tightens it up a bit. But I think there still are a lot of questions, and I think there are still some clarifications that need to be done to provide guidance to our local government. And so I would appreciate a no vote and ask for no on this bill. Thank you.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Madam President. I was hoping that Senator Ralph would come back out to the floor. I'd like him to yield to a couple questions.
Would you like to proceed? And we will see if we can find him.
I was wondering if Senator Ralph would be willing to yield to a question.
Give him a moment to get to his chair, and then we will ask him. Senator Ralph will yield. Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Madam President. And Senator Ralph, you represent St. Cloud and the area. If I'm a taxi driver or a plumber in St. Cloud and I want to do business there, what's the procedure for me to do business in St. Cloud under some of these conditions? I believe I have to have a license. Where do I go to get the license to do business in St. Cloud?
Senator
You would go to the city, Madam President, Senator Schoen, you would go to the city and you get a license. And that license would apply specifically to your activity within that city. And that license is a condition for doing business. It's not a condition of doing business. And that's the difference that we have to understand here. We are talking about local control. That's what everybody's talking about. They want local control. And they should have it as long as it stays within the boundaries of that city. So if you're a taxi driver in Minneapolis, you don't use your taxi driver's license in St. Cloud, and nor would you expect to. But if you have a business in St. Cloud and you want to do business in Minneapolis, you may be subjected to certain regulations, but if the regulations affect the way you do your business in St. Cloud, that goes beyond local control.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, you know, it's very, very subtle semantics there. If I was to operate a cab and I wanted to drive in St. Paul, go to the airport, and St. Cloud, I could do that, but I would have to go to those individual cities to apply for the license to do so. Then in your, Senator Ralph, let me ask you this, if you'd yield to another question, Madam President.
Senator Ralph will yield. Senator Schoen.
So if Minneapolis wanted to enact a $15 an hour minimum wage and it only applied to Minneapolis, would you support that?
Senator Ralph.
Madam President, Senator Schoen, I'm not quite sure what you mean by applies to Minneapolis. That's a little bit vague. We're talking semantics. Let's be specific.
Senator Schoen.
I'll give it a shot one more time, Madam President. Senator Ralph, if the law only applied to Minneapolis because Minneapolis wanted to do it, and they said, we'd like to have $15 an hour, but nowhere else in the state would you have to do it, would you support it then?
Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Schoen, your question begs the question. If I'm a business and I'm forced to pay someone at $15 an hour in Minneapolis, and I have a worker in Anoka doing exactly the same thing, what position does that leave me as a business owner in? I can choose not to do business in Minneapolis, that's true. But if I have a worker who comes to me that says, say Jerry, you know, John down the road, he's not even doing as much as I am, and we're in the cities right next to each other. I think I should be paid the same thing. So to force a business to make that decision, especially to force a business to make that decision by the actions of 5 or 7 city council members who, number one, do not have any interest in that business, have no risk in its success or failure, do not understand anything of its economics, and do not even take into account the benefits that that business might be paying, to me, goes beyond local control.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, you know, you highlight a great point here, Senator Ralph, that cities all over the state already have local control over many issues. In the city of St. Cloud, I mean, by your reasoning in theory, then we should just do away with any of the ability for them to do licensure. So if they do it in one city, then it works everywhere. If you have a cab license in St. Paul, then it should work in St. Cloud or anywhere else. And that's just not what we have in place. Local communities have set forth policies and procedures that they believe are important to their community. And, you know, I wasn't a mayor, and I know I would really like it if Senator Little would follow up on a bit of what the point I was trying to make. If I was a mayor, Senator Little, how would we, if he'd yield to a question, would Senator Little yield to a question?
Senator Little will yield. Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Little, I believe you've heard some of the conversation, and am I going down the right path here? Because I'm not completely understanding, or I'm not sure why one is better, why one is okay and now this one wouldn't be.
Senator Little.
Well, thank you, Senator Schoen. I'm really concerned about the comments that were just made that the 5 or 7 city council members are not invested in the businesses that are in their community. This is the whole point of local control, right? Like, I eat at the restaurants in my district. I shop at the stores in my district. I am personally invested in all those businesses. And as mayor, we bent over backwards to get people into Lakeville. And we created huge incentive programs so that people could have good paying jobs and live in the community. So to say that a council is not invested in their own businesses, I sure hope Senator Ralph misspoke.
Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we should take a look at what these local governments are doing and why that seems to be so scary to ALEC and the Minnesota Business Partnership and some other groups. some legislators that we have to come here and try and preempt those local governments from making those decisions. The issues we're talking about are worker protection provisions. Mr. Osmick, yes, businesses are allowed to pay more. I think I see a problem with businesses who want to pay less. Workers, the reason we have minimum wage laws, the reason we should have paid sick laws is to protect the workers, to make sure they get a fair shake. And why are people going to, in the cases that people have been talking about, to Minneapolis and St. Paul, successfully passing paid sick leave provisions, trying to pass $15 an hour minimum wage? Why are they going there? These are people who are struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to deal with sick kids. They're struggling to pay the bills, to put food on the table. And they see, and I agree with them, that the state and federal governments haven't stepped in to protect them. It's because we and the federal government have not protected them. They turn to the local officials. They petition them. That's what a democracy is about. People are supposed to petition their government for change. And that's what they've done. So now that scares us. We've got to do something to block them. Well, these workers, why do they go there? Well, if you look at Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're both fairly prosperous cities, but about a quarter of the people in both Minneapolis and St. Paul live in poverty. 1 in 4 people in Minneapolis and St. Paul live in poverty. Almost half of African Americans in the communities live in poverty. That's not something that I frankly don't think, looking around this chamber, I don't know that any of us in this chamber have experienced that in recent years. I don't know if we know what it is, but it's a crisis. If you talk to, and you can find plenty of them, and I'll introduce you to some if you want, single moms who lose their housing, and they and their kids are couch hopping to try and find a place to stay. And kids, and when we're talking about education and what makes kids succeed, kids who are already in their 2nd or 3rd school this year because they're bumping in unstable housing, that's a crisis. You talk to a young worker who can't afford housing, who's sleeping in his car, that's a crisis. And that's something that those of us in this chamber don't always feel. It's not a crisis to us. It might not be good, but I don't think we see it as the crisis that somebody who doesn't have a home to go to sees. So they're going, they don't see any action at the state or federal level, so they go to their local city councils and say, please help us. Please help us and do something about this. And I recognize, and several people have eloquently said, why the Chamber of Commerce and Business Partnership and ALEC are concerned about how this would have different standards between communities. And I understand that, and that's a legitimate concern. I'm not sure it's a crisis in the same way that somebody goes to bed hungry night after night. I'm not sure it fits the level of crisis, but it's something we ought to try and address. But the way to address it, instead of barring local governments from passing these ordinances, or instead of preempting them, we should address worker protection at the state level. Pass Senator Pappas's bill on paid sick leave. I've got a bill for $15 an hour. Sign on to that. We do it statewide. You don't have to worry about those differences. And yes, I frankly think the folks in Minneapolis, it's not like, yeah, if you put in $15 an hour today, it would really cause some troubles in the economy. So what do? They phase it in. Despite the 15 now, I think the Minneapolis proposal was phased in over 5 years. We've gone through an experiment with phasing in an increase over 3 years, and it worked. And you do it that way, and you do it in a rational way, you can do it. But instead of trying to say, we're not going to let these people who are exercising their democratic rights and organizing and talking to their local officials and saying, please give us protection. Please help us. We're in a crisis. Please support us, because the state and federal governments won't. Then maybe, instead of trying to stop them from doing it, maybe we should avoid the need for them to pass it by doing it ourselves. That's the direction we ought to head. But the bottom line is, I understand why a lot of businesses don't like this. That is a concern, but we could do that by addressing it at the state level. but preempting these local governments from addressing and providing basic protections for sick workers, for worker wages and benefits, it seems to me that that's something that if we're not going to do it, we should be hoping our local governments are stepping in for us. I urge you to vote against this bill. I think we can help our working people in ways that don't crush the protections that some communities are willing to give them.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Little yield for a question?
Senator Little will yield. Senator Pratt.
Senator Little, you know, something that Senator Marty said and you said, currently our minimum wage is at $9.50. And you believe, based on your comments, I would presume that you think Lakeville, for example, should have the right to raise minimum wage to $15. Should Lakeville have the right to have a minimum wage below the state level?
Senator Little.
Senator Pratt, thank you for that question. Perhaps you missed my first speech where I talked about my philosophy on state government, which is state government sets the floor for the protections of people and their benefits, not the ceiling. So it is the proper role of state government to set the minimum wage, but it's not the proper role of cities.
Senator Pratt.
Would Senator Little yield for another question?
He will yield. Senator Pratt.
Senator Little, you have some great restaurants in your district. I go to them quite often because they're fantastic. If your city decided to implement a tip credit, would you think that that should be part of the city's purview?
Senator Little.
Yes.
Would Senator
Senator
Little
Pratt.
yield for another question?
He will yield.
If it's a good one.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed that last comment, Senator Little. Okay. Senator Little, as mayor, you had to send your comprehensive plan to the Met Council for approval. Do you think that the Met Council should be able to trump what your city and residents want to do with zoning in your district?
Senator Little.
Senator Pratt, I am happy and open to talking about reform of the Met Council and the issues they deal with and the mandates they place on local government. I'm open to that conversation, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Senator Pratt.
If Senator Little would yield for one more question. Senator Little, Senator
will
Marty
yield, Senator Pratt.
mentioned SF 1794 paid leave. That would mandate across all employers across the state, preempting cities from being able to implement their own paid leave. Let's also ask about right to work. Do you think cities should have the right to set paid leave or right to work ordinances as well?
Senator Little.
Would you like me to answer? I think there's two parts in there. I'll answer them the same way, which is going back to my original speech. The role of state government is to set the minimum protections of benefits and safety for its citizens, right? So right to work would be setting a ceiling, and I would disagree with any bill that limited a city's right to do paid leave ordinances. I think that answered both those questions. Anything else, Senator Pratt?
No, thank you, Senator Little.
Pratt.
Mr.
Thank you.
President, it seems to me that those proponents for local control against this bill are only proponents when the measure is not in the progressive platform. This is a bill not setting a ceiling. This is a bill setting a standard, a minimum standard, exactly what Senator Little said, that allows us to do commerce throughout the state. This is a bill that will hurt commerce moving from city to city, from county to county, throughout the state. And we need this uniformity. We need this uniformity so that we have certainty, so that we're not keeping track on spreadsheets how long someone's been in a certain location. That we can transact, that we can have couriers run across the state and deliver. And so I just find it highly inconsistent that in some cases we seem to like preempting local governments and in some cases we don't.
Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. And I think, we've had some good discussion here today, some good debate. And I think the last exchange really leads me into one of the comments that I want to make that I think is pretty important. And I bring us back to early February when in committee, in Senator Miller's committee, we heard this bill. And we had a fair amount of folks come forward and testify. And one of the testifiers made some comments that stuck with me, and I want to just share some of that with you today. This was a professor from Mitchell Hamlin School of Law that gave some compelling testimony about preemption and when it is and when it isn't appropriate. And it was pretty clear through her testimony, and you can go back and review the tape, but it was pretty clear to me that she was answering the question, when is the use of preemption actually appropriate? And her message is clear. And she said, and I'll paraphrase, when a higher body properly vets a topic in its entirety and enacts a solution, that is when preemption is appropriate. And we've not done that with this bill. This bill identifies some topics at best. We've not vetted these issues. We've not talked about why it is or why it is not important for a local community to enact a higher minimum wage. We have not talked about why it is or why it isn't important for a local community to establish an earned safe and sick time ordinance. All that we've talked about is stripping away local government's ability to make their decisions. And you look at the board, it says Uniform State Labor Standards Act. What this should really say, this is the Uniform Take Away the Voice of the People Act, because that's what I see here. So when that professor spoke, this resonates with me. This is not an opportunity for preemption to take place. This is an opportunity that we should recognize at its face value. Why do local governments make the decisions and take up the things that they take up? It is because of inaction at the state level. Had we enacted the bill that's been referenced about earned safe and sick time statewide, local governments wouldn't have to take that on. But the fact of the matter is we have not. And I'm not blaming anybody for not doing that, but the fact of the matter is we have not taken that bill up. And we should not discourage local communities and local governments from having this conversation. This bill does not enact a balanced solution to each issue addressed. And again, back to the definition of when is preemption necessary. It does not do that, members. It's far too broad. Quite frankly, it's subject to litigation, and it's a highly unusual use of preemption. Highly unusual. It actually prevents in-depth local work and prohibits public access to discussion. Let's think about the committee process. How many people in your communities that don't live directly in Minneapolis or St. Paul actually have the opportunity to travel down to St. Paul at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon and offer some testimony on something that they feel incredibly passionate about? Not very many. How many of those same people actually are represented by an association that has a lobbyist that has the ability to come down and testify in front of the committee at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon? Not very many. Those people depend on their local units of governments to hear their voices, because they do have the opportunity oftentimes to go on a Monday evening or a Wednesday evening or a Thursday evening and voice their concerns in front of their city councilors, 5, 7, 9 of them, however many there are. These are people that they know. These are people that they elected. These are people that they see every day at the grocery store, as Senator Little talked about. This is an important process about local government and how important it is. And I'm particularly passionate about this because of what Duluth has done. Duluth is a city that I represent. And I don't think that anybody that signed on to this bill, quite frankly, has a good understanding of what's happening in my city. And that's what's frustrating to me. In July of 2016, the Duluth City Council passed a resolution to create a task force that would research earned safe and sick time. What they didn't want to do is cookie cutter approach. They didn't want to take what other communities had already done. They wanted to look at it from our own community perspective, and I'm very happy that they did that. But they created a process. In September of 2016, the task force members were approved by the City Council. They began their work in phases that were laid out. Since February, members, February, March, and April, there has been 9 public input sessions at locations all across my city, trying to get an understanding of what it is the community wants, what it is the community needs, with the idea of putting together a recommendation to come back to the City Council. And you can diminish that if you want. You can say, you know, that's just local city officials, but it's not. The makeup of the task force, 2 citizens at large, 2 business community representatives, labor organization, hospitality industry, health professional, economic development professional, human resources professional, a representative of an organization assisting working families, a domestic or sexual violence advocacy professional. These are the people that are doing the work. These are the people that are hearing the voices of the community all across Duluth. We don't have the opportunity to do that here. We don't have the time to do that here. Members, this is a bad bill for a number of different reasons. But if you take nothing else away from the comments that I made, I will bring you back to the very reason that the professor from the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law said, when is the use of preemption appropriate? It is when a higher body has properly vetted a topic and introduced a reasonable statewide solution. That has not happened here.
Next on my list, Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. I rise in opposition of this bill, and I like to bring a few different perspectives to the conversation. I am a small business owner. I have a business in Minneapolis, so this directly affects my livelihood outside of this part-time job here with you all. I'm also a former corporate attorney from a Minneapolis-based company, and I actually dealt with these issues on an everyday basis when I worked there. And I'm also a mother. So, and last but not least, that's another issue that's really relevant because, again, we're talking about Unified State Labor Standards Act when we're talking about how we're going to impact people's lives. And the real discussion we should be having here today, instead of preempting a discussion, is about the issues that we're trying to preempt. Paid family leave, minimum wage discussion. These are issues that we as state lawmakers should be debating in depth, and when we are going to make a decision that it's going to affect all Minnesotans, we should take that very seriously. We're in essence punting, and in essence not doing our job by saying we're not going to deal with it. We're not going to deal with it, and by the way, we're not going to let our state local governments deal with it either. So I really want you members to really think through before you vote to support this measure. I'm all for business. I'm trying to make it happen too and have a good business in Minneapolis. So I understand exactly how the Minneapolis ordinance would affect my business, or to the extent it does, and how a St. Paul ordinance would affect my business, because I also worked again with a nationwide company who had to deal with the patchwork. So I get the argument. It is a burden. It will be a burden for me. And as a lawyer, I can argue both ways. So let's talk about that. What is the argument for preemption? So like I mentioned, you know, we could have, it could be a higher cost to have business in Minneapolis versus a Richfield. That's a given because you would have to have a higher minimum wage in Minneapolis. But at the same time, it costs more to live in Minneapolis. So there is a rationale why those elected officials at the local level are pushing for this, and they should be held accountable as we are at the state level. What else is an argument for preemption? Uniformity. as a business owner, I want to make sure that I don't have to worry about borders and lines, and I just want to run my business. Let me tell you, I spend many hours on the phone talking to the bank and talking to regulators all the time when I run my small business. So I would like less of it too. But at the same time, you know, we already deal with this. We already have a federal government, we already have a state government, and we are already dealing with the minutia at the local level. So to say that businesses can't handle this, some might have a harder time. A larger business will have an easier time because more likely they'll have a department that will deal with it. In my business, I'm the HR department, I'm the treasurer department, I'm the government affairs department, I'm all of it. So I'm constantly juggling all these mandates, and I really, frankly, would like to spend more time growing my business. So I get it. But why am I against this bill? I'm against this bill because I believe in the voices of the people, and I believe when I represent my district, I'm putting my district first and foremost versus my personal interest. In this case, I received a resolution from the city of Minnetonka, which is one of the cities that I represent, and I hope you have that handout. If not, you will have it momentarily. And in it, you will see one of the resolutions that not just Minnetonka, but also 30 other cities across our wonderful state have passed, basically in support for local decision-making and the ability of local elected officials to directly respond to the needs of their community. As of this week, the 19th of this week of April, 30 resolutions passed. And members, if I list a name of a city that you represent, please note and please take note that you are voting against your city's interest. Baudette, Buffalo, Cambridge, Carver, Eagan, Ely, Iota, Franklin, Hawley, Hopkins, Isanti, Lucan, Medford, Minneapolis, Minnetonka, Mora, North St. Paul, Northfield, Olivia, Owatonna, Prior Lake, Richfield, Rochester, Springfield, St. Paul, Wabasso, Warren, Watkins, Wacon, and White Bear Lake have all passed resolutions telling them, state, back off. We have jurisdiction here. And I think we should listen to them. If nothing else, they also have election certificates, and their constituents can hold them accountable. But I do want to read for the record, if I may, Mr. President, the resolution that was passed in one of my cities, Minnetonka, that I represent. And on section 1.01, it reads, and I quote, "More than 24 bills have been introduced by the Minnesota legislature this session that would restrict local decision making. Section 1.02, and I quote, "Local elected officials are in the best position to determine what health, safety, and welfare regulations best serve their constituents." Section 1.03, and I quote, "Local elected officials, just like members of the Minnesota House and representatives of the Minnesota Senate, are held accountable through their state's robust election process." Section 1.04, and I quote, "Cities are often laboratories for ordinances at the local level are enacted only after a comprehensive, legal, and open process." Section 1.05, "Cities are often laboratories for determining public policy approaches to the challenges that face residents and businesses." Section 2, and this is the final thing that I will quote, 2.01, "By adopting this resolution, the council states it supports for local decision-making authority and opposition to legislation that removes that ability of local elected officials to respond to the needs of its constituents." I mentioned this one and I highlight this in particular because it is one of the cities that I represent. But I believe that's exactly what we should be doing as state legislators, listening to our constituents. And our constituents, in my opinion, are people. I certainly have businesses and very large and small businesses in my district, and I listen to them too. But I do believe that the closest level of government to the people is the local level, and I would think that they have a lot more to say and a lot more at stake than we do at the state level in terms of knowing what the real needs and the tools that they need to address those needs. So another thing I want to mention, and if Senator Miller, Mr. Chair, if Senator Miller can yield for a couple questions.
Senator Miller will yield. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. And Senator Miller, are you aware if the League of Minnesota Cities or the Municipal Legislative Commission, which represents the local level of government here in this debate, are they supportive of this bill?
Senator Miller.
Mr. President, Senator Franzen, I do not know.
Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Miller. And I've been taught in law school to never ask a question I do not know the answer to. So, as far as I know, they have the League of Minnesota Cities has no position on the bill, and usually that means that there is a divergence of opinions, and they can't make up their mind to certainly have one unique voice on a particular issue. So I'll take their no position as a position that's not supportive of this bill. That's my personal assumption, and having worked with those type of organizations. And then the Municipal Legislative Commission has been pushing for these resolutions to be voted on at the state, at the local level. So I would take that as to say that they are not in supportive of this bill. I would love to have a letter that I can give you with that statement, but the resolutions I think are much louder because they come from those individual cities. And again, talking to Mr. Senator Miller and Marty's position, the debate that really should be happening here at the state level is, are we in a position that we want to have a program for paid sick and family leave or minimum wage, and having those policy debates instead of preempting them with this bill? So I take that matter seriously. I think the conversation that's happening at those city council meetings are conversations that are not happening here, and that's why we have $15 in Minneapolis and a different proposal in St. Paul. If we really want to tackle those issues, and if we really don't believe that that's the way they should go, then we really should have the debate at the state level. So that is where we need to be focusing this discussion, and I do believe that we should be moving in that direction. As a mother of 2 young children, and as a small business owner, I do believe that we need to pay people what they deserve for the work that they do, and they need to have benefits that they are able to be productive citizens. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do that at the private level, at the private sector level, taxpayers are going to pick up the tab. And I believe that wholeheartedly. When we don't make those discussions and make those programs and services and policies in place at the state level, at the end of the day, we all pay. When people are going to work sick, when nurses don't have time to really get better and are back at the job, we all are unhealthier. So please, members, think about the real consequences of voting for this bill. I certainly am not putting my personal interest first. I am putting the interest of the people that I represent and the cities that have come to me to tell me that this is not the way we want to go. And I urge members to consider supporting a vote against this bill. Thank you.
To that point, Senator Miller.
Yes, Madam President, thank you. Members, if an organization takes no position on a bill, I think it's unfair to say that they do not support the bill on the Senate floor. And also, Madam President, I'm wondering if Senator Franzen will yield to a question.
Senator Franzen will yield. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President and members. Senator Franzen, I too am a small business owner and a husband to 1 and a father to 3, who I love all very much. My question for you, Senator Franzen, I absolutely respect that you are a small business owner, and I think that's fantastic. Just curious, how many employees do you have?
Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Madam President and Senator Miller. My business fluctuates around 6 employees to a dozen employees, depending on the market.
Senator Torres-Ray.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to stand to speak in opposition of this bill, and I wanted to let members know that the city of Minneapolis has worked incredibly hard to really bring the community to the conversation, to the table about how to make these decisions at the local level. And part of these conversations have really included a conversation about the competitions that cities have to have against other cities. This is not a competition just between Rochester and Minneapolis, for instance. This is a competition between Minneapolis and Portland, which already pays minimum wage of $15. Seattle, which already pays $15 as well. And also cities around the world, like Berlin. So in order to compete, to be able to attract millennials who want to work in Minneapolis, we have to have a competitive labor market. And we also need to attract business to our cities. Those are the conversations that we are having in Minneapolis. And in the local government committee, members, we ask constantly to all of the people who came to testify, especially those in local communities that came from all over Minnesota, why would they support this bill? And none of them did. All of the people who came representing local governments actually were opposing this bill. So I would like to ask Senator Miller a question, if he will yield for a question today.
Senator Miller will yield. Senator Torres-Ray.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Miller, my question to you is, could you provide the names or the list of people in local communities who came to your office or who have come to committee to ask for this change? Who are the local communities? And could you tell us a little bit about what are the arguments that local government officials and local governments actually gave you in support of your bill?
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President, and Senator Torres-Ray, thank you for the question, because we've heard from a lot of folks who support House File 60. Members, there are small businesses throughout the state of Minnesota that are struggling to get by right now. There are more job openings right now than there are people to fill those jobs. Members, the unemployment rate in the state of Minnesota is 4% versus 4.7% at the federal level. So our unemployment rate is already lower than the federal average, the national average. Members, what we're doing in the state of Minnesota is working. And we heard from a number of businesses in our committee, and I've received a number of telephone calls from folks throughout the state of Minnesota. And these are local elected officials, these are small businesses, these are community members. Especially the last few weeks, I received several calls last week while we were on our Easter Passover break from businesses, small businesses in Minneapolis and St. Paul, who have serious concerns with the local ordinances that could go into effect in those cities. So Senator Torres-Ray, I've heard from a lot of folks across the board, small communities, large communities, mid-sized communities, that if we do not pass House File 600, how detrimental that would be to their businesses and perhaps their communities.
Senator Torres-Ray.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Miller, my question, I was in local government, and I did hear the testimony from the Chamber of Commerce and the businesses who came to testify. I asked this question in committee. I asked this question to you about the local communities and representatives from local communities. Could you tell us what local towns, mayors, city council members are interested in having the state dictate to them about their local policies and decisions? My question is more related to the desire of local governments, not businesses, but local governments, with respect to accepting the decision that comes from the state government in dictating these type of policies. Could you name a few of the local government entities who actually value this direction and believe that it is important that the state of Minnesota moves in this direction?
Madam President.
Senator Sengen, for what purpose do you rise?
Madam President, just an inquiry. It seems to me, and I'll stand corrected, but there's a rule somewhere that talks about speaking to one's motivation or someone else's motivation relative to a position. I wonder if that wouldn't apply here.
Senator Senchum, we will take that as a reminder to stick to the topic at hand and not involve motives. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Torres-Ray, I thought that I mentioned it in my answer prior to the previous answer, but if I didn't, I stand corrected. Yes, I've heard from local elected officials that they support this bill. I am not going to mention any names on the Senate floor. I do not believe that is appropriate, but I absolutely have heard from local elected officials for their support on this legislation.
Senator Hayden.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't have a lot. I think a lot has been said on this topic today, and I don't know who may be swayed in the argument, but I'll give it a shot. I know as I listened to this on the Senate floor, you know, one of the things that I think about is the practical application of what is going on today and 150,000 people that may lose sick and safe time benefits as we speak, just coming down from the state and taking those away. And I thought about this. Senator Benson had a bill not long ago that had to do with some preemption stuff, and I'm not going to go into great depth because I'd have to pull it up, but I know that we were talking about the idea of people taking time off because they were sick. People taking time off because they didn't feel well and that they didn't go to work. And I started thinking about that in the context of even cuts that are happening in the proposed majority bill around the Department of Health, and how do we keep people safe? And if people come to work and they're sick, could they pass that on to folks? And it just kind of occurred to me that those are things that we might want to think about as we think about the state just unilaterally coming down and taking these things away from the local governments and the way in which they work. The one thing I will say is that someone talked about inconsistency around the state. Well, friends, members, we have inconsistencies around the state. I'm a new member of the Commerce Committee that Chair Dames is running this year, and one of the things we do there is the liquor license. And one of the things that I found odd as a new member was that the state preempts and says that only one person in each municipality can own a liquor store. So you can own multiple liquor stores. You can own multiple grocery stores, but not multiple liquor stores. And so there is a bill that is sponsored or that I've gotten talked to by the grocers and other members of the business community that wants to lift that. They want to say, hey, if you're a good business owner, you're in a particular town. I know that in Rochester was one of the examples that they gave me, that person should not be able to go back to the days of Al Capone, because that's exactly where the law came from, when there was a lot of corruption. And a person should be able to should be able to own multiple businesses, even if it is in the liquor industry. But at the same time, Senator Engelbrechtson had a bill that said, well, the city of Minneapolis wants to not have plastic bags or to change the ordinance there because of environmental issues, and that's what they're saying. But we wanted to preempt that. So the same grocers, the same people came to me at the same day, at the same time, with two different issues on this issue of preemption. It just depends on their interest. It just depends on what they wanted to do. It had nothing to do with a lot of the things that people are saying here on the Senate floor about uniformity and all of that. It was simply their business interest. And so I will say this, I got a whole list of things that I could go down, but I will say this though, members, at the end of the day, and I think Senator Little kind of articulated that, and he's a former mayor in this great state, the citizens, if they don't like, if the business owners don't like what a city is doing, guess what they get to do? Vote them out. That's ultimately, in the city of Minneapolis today, all 13 council members and the mayor are up for re-election. The citizens of Minneapolis are making the decision on what their leadership is going to look like in the future. In the city of St. Paul, the mayor is up, or there's going to be a new mayor. The mayor's slot is open. They are making a decision today. They are methodically going through the process that we've all been through to make that decision. So ultimately, if we want to talk about what's best for communities, why not let those citizens make that decision? Why not say, look, I'm a said business, I'm an individual, I'm a business owner in this town, and I don't like what this city is doing. And I'm going to find somebody that agrees with me, and I'm going to put them on that town council, that city council, that county board, and I'm going to ensure that they don't pass these laws. Members, let's think through kind of what we're doing here. Let's think through the inconsistencies and the hypocrisy that often we are talking about in this Senate floor about how this should work. Members, I implore you that this bill is not ready for prime time. This is clearly a play from industry that says this is in my interest, and they're using us as a tool for their benefit.
Senator Isaacson. One moment, Senator Isaacson. I believe I heard the beginning of clapping in the gallery, and I would just like to remind our public members who are here that we do not allow clapping. Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I've had a lot of time to kind of digest this bill, and I find it problematic on several levels. And I'd like to start off with something Senator Pratt said, that I must assume he means DFLers, only like local control when it serves our progressive interests. And I'm pretty sure that's a motive. But let me just take that as an opening, if you don't mind. Take a little liberty with that. If by progressive interests you mean taking care of the working people of Minnesota, then I'm pretty much guilty as charged. But let's flip the script on that a little bit and talk about what are the motivating factors or the pushing factors, or who's behind this bill. Is it the working people of Minnesota? I certainly do not think so. As a matter of fact, it took me probably, 3.4 seconds to find almost this exact bill on ALEC's webpage. Not only that, a cursory search discovered that about 22 different states have had similar or the exact same bill offered over the last couple years. This bill is about politics. It's not about good policy. This bill is not concerned with making sure that our workers have what they need to be successful, that they make the living wage that they deserve, that they can have time off to take care of their family. This bill is is a part of a national conversation and is invoking or inserting itself into this national discussion. Unfortunately, it isn't about what makes Minnesota great. And that's really one of the things that I'm most disappointed with this bill. It seems to me to take aim at the unions and a lot of our average working Minnesotans. The reality is, beyond the evidence of seeing how this is being part of an orchestrated nationwide plan, I have seen many bills here that we really care about. Bills that we think are important, and I've seen a lot of good bipartisan work at times. This bill is not an example of that. As a matter of fact, on numerous occasions I offered to the chair and others that I would like to work with them on it before I understood the larger political nuances. I offered to work with them and see what we can do to find some bipartisan resolution, and was never had that offer taken up. I've seen when we are interested in passing bipartisan legislation to make the state better, and this isn't an example of that. This bill is an example of a national agenda that we're trying to push through, that the opposition, I would say, the majority party is trying to push through, and I have a real problem with that. I don't think that we need to be the testing ground for national messages, and I certainly don't think that our bills should be being handed down to us by larger organizations. Now, I'm not questioning that Senator Miller wrote the bill himself. That's fine, but the similarity to the ALEC bill online that I looked at right here on my iPad is stunning. Secondly, let's talk about the reality of local control for a second. I, in my time now as in the other body and here, have had this really amazing opportunity to get to know an unbelievable group of people, and that is my local school boards, my local city council, and the local mayors. And there's one thing I know. I was asked by a student from Bethel a few weeks ago about where accountability comes in government, and I said the closest area we have to accountability is when we look at our local officials, because, like has been said several times before, they're the ones that run into their neighbors every day to talk about the laws and rules they're passing. I trust them to make the choices that need to be made for their city and for their constituents. I trust that they're going to be held accountable through the electoral process, which we have, and it's robust. I have great faith in those folks to do this work. I find it, and the irony is not lost on me, after listening to the rhetoric of this past election season, that this bill so plainly says that in St. Paul, we can manage your city better for you than you can by telling you what to do. That is quite contrary to the rhetoric that I heard on the campaign trail. I'm very disappointed to see that we think here in St. Paul we can tell these folks how to manage their business affairs and how to treat the people that work in their cities the way they do. I think it's disappointing to think that we're going to somehow mandate those things on them. I support a city's ability to make its choices. I agree with Senator Little that we set the minimum standard, and then the city wants to exceed that, that's their business. Listen, we've got a lot of really great cities here, and we've got a lot of economic diversity. You look at Redwood Falls, International Falls, Moorhead to Shoreview, right? Dalton, Minnesota to Eveleth, Minnesota. These are very economically diverse areas that have different needs. This one-size-fits-all mandate does not serve the people of Minnesota well. I don't even think it serves the businesses of Minnesota well. But what it does do is further us along the national argument that's going on up from ALEC and the national and state chamber, which is unfortunate because those organizations don't have a long history of taking care of people very well, especially when you look at our workers. And so I am adamantly opposed to this. I also am frustrated because yet I see another bill coming forward that clearly has been outlined by the governor as one that he's not going to be supportive, that we have clearly spent a lot of time on, a lot of effort and a lot of resources to try to move along, or one side has, and we're not going to see it go anywhere. And so that's a bit frustrating too, because now we're not managing the things we should really be worried about here in the state, like what your guys are trying to preempt in the first place. So I'm very disappointed, and I hope that you will vote no, send the message, and let's see if we can get some of Minnesota's real work done. Thank you.
I have a couple more on the list, but I would like to do third reading. The secretary will give House File 600 its third reading.
House File Number 600, a bill for an act relating to employment, third reading.
Third reading. Senator Latz.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I too rise in opposition to this bill for a couple of reasons. One is that one of the policies that would be preempted by this bill has to do with local authority to regulate the hours and scheduling of work time. In other words, the fair scheduling bill that I'm the chief author of here in the Senate. There's been some discussion in some communities about what to do with this. Nothing has moved forward yet in any communities. But the issues that caused this bill to be drafted, these concerns that have been raised, is when employees don't have any predictability of when they're going to be working the next week, when they're on the beck and call of their employer, where they can be called in and then canceled within short notice, even after they've made scheduling arrangements to be there. For example, people who are on hourly wages, often in the retail industry, if they need to be able to plan for doctor's appointments for themselves or for their children, parent-teacher conferences, college classes, yet they don't get notice often from their employers as to when to expect to be at work, or they are expected to show up on very, very short notice if the employer calls them and says, you've got to be here. I heard of one case where they were called, told they had to be there, made the arrangements last minute for a babysitter, showed up at work and was told immediately, oh, sorry, we don't really need you, go back home. So that the worker was out a lot of money to take care of their family at home. Or if they get scheduled for late closing hours and then told to come back in very short order the next morning to do opening hours. Things like that which make it very, very difficult for people to have stable lives for themselves and for their families. And the bill that's under consideration here today would preempt local governments from trying to find a way to make that kind of a regulation work, in cooperation, by the way, with local businesses that would be affected by this. But there's another reason why I oppose this bill. This bill would stifle the cauldron of innovation and experimentation that our local governments have proven to be. Sort of the federalism analysis that applies to state government. When local organizations or communities like Minneapolis or St. Paul or Duluth are trying to figure out how to make a minimum wage work in their communities, for example, or other local regulations work in their community, they go through the community process, they come up with ideas, they take input, and they figure out approaches that they think will work for their communities. Now, some of those approaches may work better than others. And some ideas that St. Paul has to deal with a situation, with the identical question, may be different than the way that Minneapolis approaches it or Duluth approaches it. And we would find out, if we allow the local communities the opportunity to try these out, we would find out which ones work well, which ones don't work so well, which unintended consequences would flow from one solution to a problem versus another solution. And then we would learn from that as policymakers. And as this happens statewide in Mankato or in Lakeville or in St. Louis Park, where I served on the city council for 9 years, and we figure out what works well and what doesn't work well, then we would be in a better position as a state to pick and choose among the ones that work the best if we're going to make a well-informed policy decision. But to shut down the innovation that occurs in our local communities would really be bad news for the future of good statewide policy. Now, one example I will give you is one that I worked on for many years in this legislature when I was first elected to the House in 2002, and which we finally passed in 2007 after I came over to the Senate. And that was the smoking ban, the extension of the Clean Indoor Air Act to restaurants and bars and service clubs. And we tried initially to pass a statewide effort, and it was unsuccessful. Lots of questions were raised, questions that we weren't able to answer to the satisfaction of a consensus in the legislature. So what happened is communities across the state, Beltrami County, from the north to the south, east to the west, started passing local ordinances. And some ordinances did one thing, and some ordinances approached a little bit differently. And after a number of local communities had passed ordinances, we came back at the state and looked at them and said, what worked and what didn't? And what would be the best statewide policy? And at that point, this body could make a much better informed decision about how to shape the statewide policy on that. And we did eventually do that. But it was better only because there was the room for local governments to innovate and experiment. Members, some of this comes down to the question of how much do we really trust our local governments? Now, for those of you who have come here after having served in local government, you'll understand this very well because you will value the work that you did, and you understand the quality of your colleagues at a local level and the terrific local community input that you get when you pass an ordinance one day and you walk out the day after it becomes effective, and you can see the immediate impact in your own community. But for those of you who haven't come through the local level of government as a public servant, you may perhaps not have that same level of trust. In fact, you may have a distrust or lack of confidence in your local government's ability to do the job right. And I would respectfully suggest to you that you should have more trust in your local governments than this bill seems to suggest that you would have. You know, there's this concept of federalism that I mentioned before is one that was championed by President Ronald Reagan. We had national debates, and we still hear it today. We still hear it today in Washington, where they're saying we need to move things back to the states, give more power to the states, devolve national power to the state level, because the states will have the ability to be the places where you can try out policies, where you can experiment. You hear it in the healthcare debate nationally. You hear it in Medicaid issues. You hear it in all sorts of areas of public policy. And there's a real reason why that is an important principle, a principle that Ronald Reagan championed when he was president. Give the states the authority to have to try out some policies, to see what works and what doesn't. The whole concept of federalism works just as principally here in a state when you're dealing with local units of government, whether they're school districts or they're cities, municipalities, county boards, whether you're a charter city or you're a statutory city, the same principle applies. Allow the cities to have some authority to try things out and to see what works and what doesn't work. And we may find that things aren't as bad as some people are predicting. And either way, we will learn from the experience. And if in a few years we come back and we see that some of our local communities have tried some of this and it makes some sense to do it statewide, then maybe we can have a more informed decision. And if we decide it doesn't make any sense to do it statewide, again, that will be a much better informed decision. So I, for one, will stand with my local city councils, with my cities that have passed resolutions opposing this. You know, I tell you, it seems to be that there is very little confidence in our local governments, because I looked at what Senator Franzen handed out, and that list of state bills that have been introduced that would preempt local governments. I mean, how many pages do we have it here? This is a legislature right now that seems to have a very strong interest in preempting local government from doing all sorts of things. I would suggest that would be an inappropriate arrogation of power by the state legislature. It's not just on one issue relating to labor standards. It's a broad principle that apparently many members of this legislature adhered to, which is we know better than everyone at the local level, than all of our constituents who have meaningful input at the local level. I would suggest that for most of these bills that aren't going to go anywhere, this should be one of them. Vote no.
Senator Bach?
Well, Madam President, Senator Miller was right when earlier today he said that Minnesota's labor market is tightening up, and he indicated that our unemployment rate is at 4%, where the federal rate is about 4.5. Members, the truth is, and Senator Miller, the truth is, Department of Economic Development came out with the new employment numbers today, and the rate's actually 3.8%. Now, good news. I think we all should be happy about that. We have a record number of Minnesotans working in the private sector, 2.5 million people. And as this labor market continues to tighten, and I think everybody agrees it will, wages are going to be pushed up. And communities need to be able to respond to that. And I have always in my time here given as much deference as I can to my locally elected officials, because they really are closest to the communities that I represent. And this year I've got, if you look at the list, I probably introduced as many or more bills than anybody. And most of them are at the request of my local governments, because they want or need some kind of an authorization from the state. So this morning, I decided to text my mayor, and many of you know where the town of Ely, Minnesota is, and to text my mayor because I'd read something in the paper about they were considering a resolution about this preemption issue. And this is what I heard back from the mayor, members, and many of you not only know where Ely is, you've been there. He said, it's on our agenda, but the agenda's not public yet. The city will be passing a resolution against all bills or ideas that take power away from cities to determine their own destiny. The list is quite extensive. It took 3 pages to print. Members, let me tell you why Ely, the little town of Ely, feels so strong about this. In 2015, there were 3,408 people in Ely. The city of Ely has not been that small since the 1890s. And population all across the state and rural towns are struggling. But Ely used to be, in 1930, was over 6,100 people. And today it's 3,408. Members, they feel strongly about this in Ely because there probably isn't another community in this town that has felt the heavy hand of an upper level of government more than the city of Ely has. You know, when the Boundary Waters was created, They took all the motorboats away. They took the timber harvesting away. They took the mining away. And the city of Ely was devastated. 84 families lost their family resorts, with the federal government with a gun to their head saying, you either take our offer or we'll take it by eminent domain. And it happened again not too far from Ely and Voyageurs National Park when the federal government came in and told all those cabin owners on all those big lakes, Kaptogavan, Namakan, Rainy, Sandpoint, family cabins for generations. And the federal government came along and said, here's our offer, take it, or we'll let you stay there for 25 years, and then we're going to take it from you. And it was interesting, a few years ago, I started to get emails from people that had family cabins, and they said, we didn't realize 25 years would come so fast. Members, up north, people have felt this hand of the upper levels of government for a couple of generations now. And our communities have been incredibly changed because of it. So I really understand the passion that our local government officials have to be able to determine the destiny of their own community and not have the state government or the federal government come in and lay down the thumb of what they think our communities should look like. So today I'm going to vote no on this bill. I have to trust my local elected officials that they're really the ones responsible for what they want their community to look like. And I stand with my mayors and my city councilors. Madam President, I have not heard from one. And I have as many cities and 4 counties as most of you in this room. And I have not heard from one local elected official that wanted this bill to pass.
Senator Herr.
Thank you, Madam President. And I myself will stand with my mayor, my city council, my district council, and all the business associations that are in my district. I'm going to vote no. And I was not going to speak, but I saw a letter here sent by the Hmong Chamber of Commerce. So I was surprised to see this letter from the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, and I'm happy of the organization activism. And I hope that this is not just a one-time fluke, or else it will be flakes. I encourage an ongoing engagement from the Chamber of Commerce and hold us, legislators, and the people accountable. I don't know the purpose of the GOP leadership, but I see this letter as slightly offensive to me, that the leadership are tampering with ethnic community Chamber of Commerce. And I wonder where the other Chamber of Commerce stand, Latino Chamber of Commerce, the Oromo Chamber of Commerce, the Somalia Chamber of Commerce, and why I specifically grab a Chamber of Commerce, Hmong Chamber of Commerce, being that I'm of Hmong American descent, whether that would change my mind, whether that would be pressuring to me. And that even make me gonna vote even a strong red. You know, I also wonder whether our council, our Council of Asian Pacific Minnesota, has been in discussion with the Chamber of Commerce and give them thorough information about the pros and cons, the partial and impartial of this matter before putting this letter forth. And again, I'm only slightly offended because I represent more than just the Hmong community, Somali, European descent, the whole east side of St. Paul, and the whole state of Minnesota. So that's minor. I always say that if Minnesota is better, so is the Hmong community. If St. Paul is better, so is the Hmong community. And so I do question the GOP leadership that if you really care about the growth of ethnic chamber or ethnic businesses, then send your equity dollar to the east side St. Paul, send it to Frogtown, send it to North Minneapolis. And where were you, or where were we when east side was falling apart? Where were we when the Hmong Chamber of Commerce nearly collapsed? And I have right to say that because I'm a co-founder of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce. I'm glad that Senator Miller was able to get a letter from the current chair of the Chamber of Commerce. So next time, I'd like to see the letter, but next time I'd like to see a logo among Chamber of Commerce, among the Fortune 500 businesses here with this letter, instead of having a separate letter, and we're not qualified with the Fortune 500. So next time, when the Hmong Chamber of Commerce come and ask me for $40 million equity dollar, I said, go talk to Senator Miller. He will help you, and I will help you too. I will help work with Senator Miller on this. But I said, perhaps it will be tough, because I know my fourth year here, being here 4 years, it's been tough for me to get small dollar, even $25,000 to appropriate to certain community. It's almost like pulling teeth. And I hope that we'll be concerned. This is why local control matters. This is why local control matters. It will open doors to ethnic chamber of commerce to talk to their local city council, to talk with their mayors, and allow the city to create a workable pathway for the ethnic minority business in our city. So again, I'm going to vote against this bill. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Miller.
Madam President, members, I take deep offense to Senator Herr's comments to question the motives of anybody in this chamber because of a letter that they passed out that was asked of me to pass out by the Hmong Chamber of Commerce. I did not approach the Hmong Chamber of Commerce members. They approached me and asked if I would hand out this letter on their behalf. And to the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, you are absolutely welcome in my office anytime to talk about any policies that are important to you or the folks that you represent. That's an open invitation. They've been in my office before, and they're welcome anytime.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, like others, have been listening to this debate and just have a few comments to say. Senator Isaacson, Senator Marty, both have talked about a national agenda or a political agenda. I think there's some truth to that, and some of that is the myth of raising minimum wage and how that will help. That's an agenda that seems to be a national agenda. And I can't remember who said it, but let me say, when it comes to this bill affecting hard-working Minnesotans, business owners are hard-working Minnesotans too. And I think we need to realize that. Let's talk about local control. How about private enterprise being as local as it gets? How about parents first or families first? It's not about trust, Senator Latz, it's about management. Some things the state manages better than the city. Some things we have national management better than the state or city or county. Sometimes I'd like to just give this over to Minneapolis. Let them do it, because it would be a Minneapolis management mess, is what it would be. But not just for Minneapolis, although it would affect them the worst. It would be for the state. So yes, it is our job to protect Minnesotans, all hardworking Minnesotans, and that includes private businesses. And so that's why I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Final comments, Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I truly appreciate the healthy debate, other than the deeply offensive comments. I appreciate the healthy debate today in the chamber. There are 853 cities in 87 counties within the state of Minnesota. Let me repeat that. 853 cities in 87 counties within the state of Minnesota. And as you can imagine, just think about it. A patchwork of inconsistent labor standards from city to city, or county to county, or both cities and counties, would be extremely confusing, but a significant burden on Minnesota businesses, especially small businesses. And members, that's who we're hearing from. We're hearing from the small businesses who have serious concerns about what's going on. And rather than getting buried with additional rules and regulations, which government tends to do a good job on our small businesses, burying them with rules and regulations, let's allow companies to focus on growing their business and creating more opportunities for workers and communities throughout the state. I urge a yes vote.
Secretary will take the roll on House File 600. All those senators having voted who desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 35 ayes and 31 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.